being with you. Up till now, I haven't been able to attend this conference because it was always at a time when my wife and I were out of the country. And so it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the invitation, and thank the other speakers. 6 and 7. So I got sober as a young guy. I was 24 years old by a week. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm one of 7 kids. Grew up in a Catholic ghetto. If your family had less than 7 children, you had a reproduction problem. We had clans that were friends with each other, and it was a delightful time to grow up. We were the kids of those Second World War people who were extraordinary people who worked hard, played hard, drank hard, and showed us a pretty good way of living. I found alcohol, and I just loved it. My mother sent the oldest ones in our family to school to get us the hell out of the house. I was the youngest kid in my class. I was 4'11", 95 pounds in high school. And I kept praying to gain weight. I wish to hell I would have stopped praying to gain weight at some point in time. And I wanted more hair, on especially my face. And I wish I had stopped doing that over some time. So we drank in high school like a lot of people drink in college. We had fraternities. Of my 6 closest buddies in high school, 4 of us are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and 2 of our wives. And one of the 5th guys is an Al-Anon. He was my college roommate. We've all been married more than 50 years, and we've all been sober more than 45 years. So it's a really odd collection of facts that we did. As I said, I love drinking. And then it started to cause me some difficulty, and I got in trouble with the police, and I was the guy that made the false ID cards, all that kind of stuff. I had a chance to go away to school. I thought I'd get away from my dad and some of the other authorities, and thought my drinking would become normal. And long story short, I drank my way out of the University of Notre Dame in the middle of my senior year. In the yearbook with my class ring, I walked out. I was in civil engineering, carrying 25 credits a semester in civil engineering. And my string just ran out. I was due to be commissioned. I had to get a medical release. The medical release I got was for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was 18. That seems stupid. I really had trouble getting my hands around that, but it got me out of the service. I came back home to a set of very disappointed parents and finished school at a local university. And when I finished school, my dad asked me to leave home. He said, "We love you, but we don't know what the hell to do with you." And this started my last year of my drinking. And I was kind of waiting to see what the service is going to do. The Vietnam War's on, I'm going to get drafted. I'm no longer exempt. I got a job at a liquor store, which I had for about 6 months. And I'm drinking a 5th a day. No one knows where I am, which is just fine with me. I'm really ashamed of what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. So I got a job as a waiter downtown Minneapolis. I'm living kind of on Skid Row, shacked up with waiters and waitresses that I work with. And, Dr. Seuss, that child author, those are actual photographs of people I lived with during the last year of my drinking. And one night I went to a party, got my face kicked in, and I got fired as a waiter. And I went back to my family and asked if I could move back in the house. They allowed me to move back in the house. The service accepted me into officer candidate school. They lost my file. They asked me to take the physical again, and I took it for the 4th time and failed it. And now I don't have to go to Vietnam. I got back together with a woman that I had gone with for 1.5 years. And today, she's my very lovely wife, Linda. I got a job as an executive trainee in a manufacturing concern. I bought my first car, and I thought, holy buckets, I'm going to be a grown-up. Only I can't quit drinking. All of a sudden, it never occurred to me if I really wanted to quit drinking that I couldn't. And just before I went back to my senior year at Notre Dame, I was beaten up and robbed, rolled, pistol whipped, shot at, thrown out of the 2nd story of a hotel, and ended up in a psych ward. And they were not going to let me go back to school. And I talked my way out of that. They let me go back. I didn't drink for 2 months. I didn't become what I thought everybody was telling me I'd become if I just wouldn't drink. I didn't become a model kid or a better student. I was still the jerk that I had been over much of that time. And I thought I proved that I could quit. And number 2, that alcohol wasn't my problem. I didn't know what the hell it was, but it didn't, if I could quit and I still had the problem, it seemed like the problem was elsewhere. And now I'm the company drunk. I'm falling asleep at my desk. I'm sleeping off my hangovers in the dark room. I quit that job and I took a sales job, and I had the sales job. When I went back to that company to make amends, who hired me, the guy said, "God, you interviewed so well." And I said, "Yeah, we do interview well. We have performance problems, but we interview well." So I got a sales job, and about 2 months into that sales job, I went on a 4-day drunk. And I woke up sometime in July of 1967. And that was my moment, hugging the toilet, doing my morning exercises. And that was my moment. And I was given the grace to call Alcoholics Anonymous. I got an old timer down at the central office, and he sent 2 guys out to see me. I had been given the opportunity to get every kind of help a young person could get. With psychology and medical and spiritual, and everybody, my parents were just at their wits' end trying to put me in front of someone that could make a difference. It looked like I was being self-destructive, and a couple of times through car accidents and that pistol deal, it looked like I was really self-destructive, and no one had an answer for it, and I didn't either. But these 2 men sat me down and said, "We're from Alcoholics Anonymous. We had a drinking problem, found an answer for it, want to share it with you. Hope it helps you. If it doesn't help you, don't worry about it. For some strange reason, talking to guys like you helps us." And they sat and they told me their story. And in a matter of 45 minutes, they changed my life. We have many traditions in AA, but one of the most wonderful ones is that we share our experience, strength, and hope, not our philosophy, not our dogma. We share, and I could have walked away not wanting to do what they recommended, but I knew it was genuine. I knew their stories had integrity, and they touched me, and it altered my life. I went to my first meeting of AA that night. I drank twice after coming in AA, once after a month on a business trip to LA, and came back, got sober again, and I was sober for 3 months, and my wife and I honeymooned in Mexico, and I drank on our honeymoon, and the last drink I had was on December 10th, 1967 on the airplane on the way home. My sponsor told me that if I went to a dozen meetings, I would be able to diagnose whether or not I belonged, whether or not I was alcoholic, and I think that was true for me. And so I said, "Okay, I buy it. I'm an alcoholic." Well, if I'm an alcoholic and AA's got the answer for alcoholism, I've got a half a dozen other things that are causing me trouble. And if AA works, I mean, those things ought to be cleared up, and hell, it might take a year. It might take 54 years is what the heck it might take. So I found myself, I didn't have a very good sense of my defects of character my first year. I was really on a honeymoon. I loved, my gift is I loved AA from the moment I walked in. That's not everybody's experience, and it was mine, and it was a gift. But it was always trouble for me to do the work, but it wasn't trouble for me staying in AA because of my affection for my experience. So now I'm sober, and one by one, during my second year especially, I got my defects of character handed to me. And my worst behavior issues, I was a money spender. I spent more money than I make. If you do that over a long period of time, you end up in debt. Just want to report that to you. Number 2, I had trouble getting up in the morning. I found later on that it had something to do with when I went to bed, but I didn't understand that at that point. My biggest problem is I was a horrible worker. You know, I had trouble getting to work. I had trouble staying at work, and I had some trouble working at work. Other than that, I was a pretty good worker. That was my largest secret. And I tried to keep that. My mother always said, "You're not very bright, Bob. Dress well." And so I looked good, but I had this significant unmanageability. And then I had a gambling problem. It was more of a hobby, 4 or 5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, but I'm making $5 grand a year playing backgammon, and it seemed like a second job. And we started to have children. My wife was an RN, and she's working, a full-time job. And I was not a particularly helpful husband when I'm so, in early sobriety. I wanted to always be in AA. And these were not casual problems. These were everyday problems. And I tried like heck. I think my thinking was, as you get me sober, and I'll learn how to be a husband. I'll learn how to work. I'll quit gambling. And I found myself, at 2 or 3 years, these problems started to stack up, and I'm in debt again. Linda and I cleaned up our bills when I first got in sober and Alcoholics Anonymous. I found myself at 5, 6, 7 years sober, and I'm dying. I had a wall built around me saying, you like me, but you only like what I let you see about me. If you could see everything about me, you'd hate me. I hate me. And when I tore that wall down during my first fifth step, I made a discovery. The discovery was that I'm not unique. My personality may be unique, but not my illness, not my behavior, and not my feelings. And I started to have a sense of hope that would work for you could work for me. But now I'm sober 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and I've got gambling issues and money issues and parenting issues and work issues. And, you know, so brick by brick, I built the damn wall back up sober, going to 7 meetings a week, you know, saying, you know, thank you very much for helping my drinking problem, stay out of my sex life, stay out of my, you know, money problems, stay out of my work, stay out of my marriage, stay out of my parenting. And brick by brick, I built the damn thing up sober 7 years. Well, at 7.5 years, give or take, I'm in real trouble. I'm not thinking about drinking, but I'm thinking about putting a gun in my mouth. And I knew what the answer was. The answer was to find out what God had to do with Wednesday. I mean, I had a parochial education through grade school, high school, and college. I knew a lot about God, but I did not know God in the way that the people in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous seemed to know him. They knew him experientially, and they could talk about the demonstration of that relationship in their lives. And I could talk about part of it. Part of my life was better, but I had this hidden part of me, and it was the story of my life. I started well, I just never finished anything. And here I am, another, you know, sober 7 years in AA, and I'm a joke. I'm a suit. I look okay, but it's not very pretty underneath the covers. And I was stuck in that. I said, I can't go to God with all 7 of these problems. I got to get rid of 1 or 2 before I go turn myself in. And I was stuck there for about 1.5 years. And finally, out of desperation, I didn't know what the hell else to do. I went back and through the steps for the 3rd time. Powerless and unmanageable, that was a no-brainer. That was obvious. Well, what shocked me is I had lost step 2. I believed it for us, but not for me, because I'm almost 8 years sober and my pants are on fire. And I had you know, I think you get more or less active when you're in trouble. I got more active. I started to see people with bigger problems walking through walls I was trying to avoid with dignity and grace. And I came again to believe that God would restore Bob to sanity. I took step 3 on my knees with my sponsor in his office. We didn't do that much in those days, but I started to hear some people in California talk about doing that, and I wanted to dot the I's and cross the T's. And then I started my 3rd, 4th step. Best inventory I think I've ever taken, because I was in a lot of pain and my ego was suppressed. My first 2 5th steps had been with clergy, which is the way we did it in our group. And I started to hear you guys talk about doing it with your sponsor. And so I went to my sponsor and I said, I want to do my 5th step with you. And I said, when we're done, be careful, because whatever you recommend, I said, I feel like I'm dying of thirst laying next to a lake. I said, you could come to my house with my problems, and I think I could tell you a reasonable idea of what to do. I either can't or won't do it. What the hell is the matter with me? That I know the words, I might even know what actions to take, and I'm not doing it. Or if I'm doing it, I'm not doing it in an effective away manner. You know, I believe in God, but I'm not, you know, I'm not changing. I'm not the essential changes that I need to take place in order, I think, to be a better guy are not happening. And I did my 4th step, and then I did my 5th step with my sponsor, and we talked. I cried a little bit. One of the things he recommended is I go to a psychologist that works with business people. I just hated that. That made me sound like I had a bad program. Hello. And it also made me sound like I was different. And then the psychologist wanted my wife involved. And I thought, crap, when your wife's in the room, there's just a lot of information that isn't very necessary that's in the room with you. And it's often quite embarrassing. But I said I would do it. And I'm in this room explaining to this guy that my company is going down. I might have to file bankruptcy. I'm going to lose everything I have. And he looked at me and he said, why are you so afraid of failing? And I wanted to punch him. That's not my style, but I mean, that's the feel. I felt like he punched me. And I said, look, I've lived in this town all my life. I'm in the investment business. You know, I'm busting my ass, 2 or 3 hours a day. And I said, I'm about to go broke. And if I go broke, I'm going to lose everything I had. I said, you're a doctor. You go broke, you just take your little sign, walk down the hall, and in 6 months, you're making 100 grand again. I'm going to lose everything I have. Nod your head up and down if you understand that. And he looked at my wife and he said, if Bob lost everything he had, would he lose you? And my wife said, wouldn't lose me. He asked the kids. And the fact is, if you can't lose, you can't play. And what I discovered in that man's office was fear. Now, you'd think we were not as good with the book, at least in my area, as we are today. You'd think after doing 3 inventories, I would have had a pretty good idea about being afraid of being a husband, a father, a worker, afraid of failure and afraid of success. I would have had some insight about these. Fear was dogs, snakes, and tall buildings. I did not get to the causes and conditions other than the third inventory I took. So that week I had a horrible week. A horrible day. I went to work late. I got left early. I got in a backgammon game. I won $500. I missed dinner. I missed the A meeting. I got in a fight with my wife and I slapped one of the kids. One of those days you'd like to have videotaped and sent to the general service office to show what 7.5 or 8 years of sobriety could do. And I'm in my living room. I'm in tears. I think I'm such a horse's ass. I just can't believe that I'm still doing this. And I said, gee, it happened again. And this voice came back and said, it happened again. Weren't you there? I said, yeah, I'm there. But it's like I'm in a blackout. It's like it's so automatic, I don't even think about it. And this voice came back and said, bull crap. Your life's the way it is because you designed it that way. You sound like a guy who wants to quit gambling. You want to gamble whenever the hell you want to gamble and not have problems because of gambling. You want money without work. You want your wife's and children's love and affection without spending enough time with them. You got a really bad design. And I, at that moment, I had this sense that I had tried as hard as I knew how to try, imperfectly, to clean my act up, and I had failed. And for some reason, I was able to stand in front of that. When I came in AA, I stood in front of my alcoholism naked, and it altered me. That night, I stood in front of my life naked, and it altered me. And I was given the opportunity to take the 6th and the 7th step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous at a level and depths I'd never taken before. 6 steps said we're entirely ready to have God remove our defects of character. 7 steps said we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. I have spent 8 years trying to get rid of them. I don't have the power. I have the responsibility, but it happens through me, not by me. I'm the pipe, not the well. The doctor creates an aseptic environment, creates an atmosphere in which healing can take place and God heals. I don't change. I create the atmosphere where change can take place through my activity, through my step taking, through the book, through my prayers, and God changes me. That's the attitude in the 6th and the 7th step and the 3 requirements of being honest, open-minded, and being willing. That night, I quit gambling. That night, I started dating my wife every Friday night for the next 35 years. That night, the next day, I gave my wife the checkbook. My wife is a better money manager than I had. She had us out of financial difficulty, and I went on an allowance, $100 a week. I'm up to 150. I feel like I'm kept. She puts 150 under the radio every week, every Friday, which is great. I spent thousands of hours or hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars trying to learn how to be a better parent. I think being a parent takes 125% of whatever you have. I think having children is like having a bowling alley installed in your head, and the instruction manual is a little thin. And I made appointments with my sponsor about going to work, staying at work, and working at work. And so if I was an active guy sponsoring people, I had all the merit badges, I'm active in service, I'm giving talks, I'm going to 7 meetings a week. And if the 6th and the 7th step work, why would I, at 7 years or 8 years of sobriety, have significant, not just casual defects of character, often the same defects of character that I had during my early days and never even made my inventory. I mean, I had those same behaviors when I did my first inventory. My first inventory was, not in causes and conditions. It was verbalizing the worst things that I had done. And I really think that that's a spiritual mystery for many of us, and many of us never get into the 6th and the 7th step of depth until we have what most of us often refer to as a second surrender in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was so ashamed of having to have a second surrender at 8 years of sobriety. It was really awkward. The longer I'm sober now, I think that somewhere between 5 and 15 years, that's an experience that most or many of us have, where we have to get, it's why Bill wrote the 12 and 12, to broaden and deepen the relationship with the steps of the people that he saw that were, having anger issues and depression issues. And he wanted to, write the essays on the steps in a way that might enlighten people who are taking the steps. And of course, his expansion of 6 and 7 in the 12 and 12 is just extraordinary. It is absolutely wonderful. I think if I were to really tell the truth, which I'm supposed to do, when at 8 years of sobriety and even maybe up to 15 years of sobriety, I don't think I believed in steps 6 and 7. I acquiesced to them. I talked about like I believed in them. I could have given you a little talk on them, but the fact is I thought it was my responsibility to take the steps. I thought I needed a guy or a gal to help me go through and do a better inventory. I needed a more insightful sponsor. I needed to go listen to some of these people that were really experts on the book and get some insight so that I could practice the program in such a way that I could demonstrate these things in my life. I really thought, and I stayed in a subtle way, even though I looked like a pretty good member of Alcoholics Anonymous, in a subtle way, I remained self-directed. In a subtle way, I was relying on myself to manage my life, even though I was trying to be in cooperation with my higher power, even though I was trying to do the steps, I still was acting like God. I had not surrendered. And it's interesting in the 6th step when it talks about, that we had, until we talk about these steps with someone else, talk about our defect. And my first reaction was, well, my 5th step was talking about my behavior. My 5th step was, my resentments, fear, and sex. I don't think I walked out of my 5th steps and 4th steps with a really good list of my defects of character. I walked out with a long conversation about interactions and things I had done wrong, stuff I have stolen, actions that I have taken that I needed to make amends for. I was headed towards 8 and 9. I did not, and I'm shocked that even today, I think the next 5th step, 4th and 5th step that I do, I really want a list. I think I'm pretty open and I think I'm pretty current with my sponsor, with what's going on in my life. But I don't think I ever really walked in with a list of 7 or 8 or 9 defects of character, the emotional and behavioral issues that I would go over with them. I would talk about events in my life rather than, these principles. And for me, for a long time, I always, because of my exposure to God, being a Catholic was very important to me until I found masturbation and alcohol, and then I became kind of a casual member. It was really just a terrible relationship that I had because it was very important to me growing up. And now all of a sudden I'm I'm kind of on the sidelines and I'm, having difficulty. And I think I know what God wants me to do. I just can't do it. And I think that a lot of us, 6 and 7, talk an awful lot about directing our lives to what God would have us be. And I think, frankly, at some level, we're scared witless at really turning our lives over to the care of God. We were willing to turn our alcoholism over to the care of God and what we thought related to our alcoholism. But to turn our finances, to turn our sex life, to turn our parenting, to turn issues, if you've had an anger issue all your life, and you haven't been very effective at dealing with it, opening that whole, even having the damn conversation, if you've been sober a while, and many of us are walking around with grenade with the pins up. We're walking around with problems that if we don't change them, we're not going to stay married. If we don't change them, we're going to lose some of our career jobs. If we don't change them, we're not going to have the peace and joy and happiness that I think our program offers. And I think when we're talked about, or most men lead lives of quiet desperation, I really think that many of us lead lives of quiet desperation. That the angst I was having at 8 years of sobriety, that many of us have those issues, and the way out of them, rather than kind of joyfully examine the fact that I'm 8 years sober and I finally have found out I can't do it, that I have to have the same surrender experience. So when I'm working with someone and we're moving towards a step 4 and 5, I really want that, want the guy that I work with, my gal, to do 1, 2, and 3 seriously. 1, 2, and 3. I think most of us get it. We really think we have 1, 2, and 3, and I think to a very serious extent, most of us do not have an active surrender relationship, a surrender that is strong enough. And I think the essence of that is what step 7 talks about. I mean, humility for some reason, it just laid heavy on me the last year. It is, I'm a guy who, has been pretty reactive all my life. I feel like I'm got a team of 4 big horses that I'm trying to hold back. And the fact is now I'm getting to the age where I've reached the see-through age. People just look right through you. They aren't very interested. Unless you got a big billfold, they aren't very interested in what you have to say. The world's being run by, 35 or 40-year-olds, and your children are starting to think you're lame. And it is, I think, an opportunity. I would like, if someone said, where am I spiritually in my life? I would like to be done with me. I spent far too much time in my life taking care of Bob, far too much time being interested in what Bob has to say. And if I would lighten up and realize that I'm not very important, then my getting upset at lines or driving or children or whatever the hell it is, who cares? It isn't. If I'm connected with God, if I have that relationship with the God of my understanding, and I have enough humility to not think it's very important that when someone pisses me off, I have an opportunity to live in a peaceful way, in a much more peaceful way than I ever have before in my life. If I'm more humble about who I am and less in my importance, my self-importance, then I think I'm open to being able to take a current inventory and to be able to take a look at the unworkable things in my life. I think most of us, I tell that story that I'm working with a guy who's doing an inventory and he's having trouble with the columns. And I'm just saying, hey, don't worry about the columns. They're confusing. Don't, just go over to your house. And I said, I want you to have a meeting set up. I want you to take your last 2 employers and your ex-wife, your wife, your 2 kids, your 2 guys from your group that know you pretty well, and your brothers and sisters, and bring them over to the house and say, we have a step in AA where we try to get in touch with our defects of character, and I'm having trouble identifying mine and wondered if you'd help. And then pass out pens and paper and have them do an inventory. You'd have a pretty damn good start, I promise you, on your inventory. Well, most of us wouldn't call that meeting. You know why? We don't want to, we don't want to change. And I think some of us could put our hand on a lie detector and say, yeah, I want to change. I'm saying, yeah, but you've got part of you that doesn't. You're conflicted. You've got part of you that wants to change, a part of you that doesn't want to change. A significant part of your alcoholism is subconscious. And some of these things that are subconscious are running your life, and you're acting like you're unaware of them. The people around you are very aware of the consequences of your behavior. And you are colorblind. You don't see it. And until you start seeing it, and not only do we not want to change, we don't want to know. We train the people in our lives about what they can say to us and what they can't say. You train your boss, you train your spouse. We're not having that conversation. You want to have that conversation, it's going to be a bad conversation. You train your sponsees. You can tell what your sponsees are open to hearing and what they're not open to hearing. I mean, we train each other about what we're open to and what we want to hear and what we don't want to hear. And I think in order to unlock those secret places, to unlock the subconscious, to have the healing that, Jung talks about, and so does a number of people that are reading some of the spiritual readings, they talk about spiritual healing that takes place kind of automatically, kind of without intent. It is all, when Bill Wilson talks about, right after step, when he's starting step 5, and he says, now our problems are about to be cast out. Well, I'll tell you, that process, 5 through 9, is one of the great spiritual trips that anybody will ever take. I mean, if we told most people that their list of resentments are going to end up being their amends list, I mean, I think they'd run out of the room screaming. And for many of us, that is what that journey is so profound, that the change is so transforming, that's almost exactly what happens with many of us, is that our amends list turns out to be our resentment list, which is, really, really something. And we could not make that that is a spiritual change at a level. And Bill Wilson, both in step 6 and 7 and in the big book, if you ask Bill Wilson when he got sober, both he and Lois would say Bill experienced his release, in December of 1934, December 11th, 1934. Not that he got sober, not that he took his last drink, that he experienced his release. On page 84 and 85, my favorite promises after step 10, the sentence that says, we're not even fighting the problem. Instead, the problem has been removed. I mean, what an extraordinary statement. It didn't say I removed it. It didn't say that I did A, B, and C, and now it's done. It said the problem has been removed. And I think, and if you ask me today if I believed in the 6th and the 7th step, I wholeheartedly believe in the 6th and the 7th step. I think my continued participation in the program and with the steps and with you people on the screen at the meetings, I have become part of a community. I really want to be a person of integrity with respect to how I live my life. I want to be a person of integrity with respect to how I try to practice the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not perfect, and I'm not going to be perfect. It's pretty obvious by looking at human beings that God didn't design us to be perfect. But I really do think he designed us to have a significant relationship with himself. I really do think that moving towards the light, moving towards what we think, I think we have a knower. So when you listen to when Candace was talking about how wonderful the other speakers were, when you're listening to some of those speakers that are gifted in their ability to communicate, sometimes your soul, when you hear something, your soul just goes, oh yeah. It doesn't go, I like that. I think I'll write that. It just knows it has heard something that is strong, direct, and true. They've never heard it before, but they know without a question of a doubt that it's true. We have inside of each of us that, that God that is deep within, we have a piece of original equipment manufacturing that's intact, unchanged, and unmarred. It is pure. And it is our knower. And in that spot, God and us, I think, are one. And we have I really think that when we're connected to God, we have access to the mainframe. We're walking around when we're not connected to God, when we're using our ego and intellect, we got a handheld computer. But we have an intuitive access to knowing in the program. I think it was in our literature when it talked about that if I would quiet my mind, I think I've heard Billy talk about this. If I would quiet my mind I would be able, I think I would be able to know what the next right action is, and what I should do in almost every circumstance that's in front of me. I've heard people say that if you really knew the mind of God, God's will for you would be your will for you. That you would be able to see the full broad impact of the decisions that you make, and you would, and your higher power would be moving you in exactly the same direction that you would now be willing to take, understanding all the different factors that are impinging on our lives. And maybe because I'm an old burnt out guy, I have lost the fear of doing what God would have me do. And I'm on a team, I mean, the sober team, the people on the screen, my running buddies, as Ralph talks about them. I've got a new sponsor for the last year and a half or so since Howard passed away, with Tim Hyland, and we have a great relationship. And I've got 7 or 8 other people that I'm in relationship all the time, and they're kind of my road dogs, and we encourage each other. There comes a time in a lot of people's programs where, they change and fail, they change and fail, they change and fail, but they still grow. Well, there comes a time in AA, usually about 7 or 8 years, where you either change or you stop growing. And when you stop growing and you take that left-hand turn, what you do is you build an addition on your house to accommodate the problem. Chasers hang out with the chasers, gamblers hang out with the gamblers, and we make a deal. You don't call me on my crap, I won't call you on yours. Deal? Bad deal. The guys that I respect the most and want to be in relationship with and want them on my team, we have the opposite deal. The deal is if you see me and you're worried about the direction I'm taking with my behavior, nicely pull me aside and tell me. And that's spiritual consent, as some people talk about it in the book, that we're supposed to have, I think, with our sponsors without question. But extending that spiritual consent to your buddies is a wonderful thing, because I feel like I'm, kind of on a team. And what happens is my general, I just don't have a fear of the general direction of my life if I'm moving towards the light. There isn't any, and some of that I think has to do with age. Some of that has to do with the fact that I'm not active day to day in business. Because when I find myself in business and I find myself with my historic business partner of 51 years, he's 57 years sober, we are like an old married couple that argue a lot. We've fought about everything other than money. And I have a pattern of argument, which is why I quit working day to day. I didn't like myself in that pattern. Didn't like him in the pattern, but I really did not like me. It was not okay how I was behaving in that pattern, and I stepped out of it. And our relationship today is more loving, still imperfect. But the reason I think that our relationship is strained in those situations is there's something I want in the middle of that. There's something that I identify, that, the finances or the control issue or whatever the hell it is, or he's getting my, I don't, it doesn't matter what the hell it is, other than the fact that I have identified that as essential to me, that I've identified that item as being connected to the real Bob. And it's not connected at all. I mean, it has to do with business and money or ego and power. It's not part of my true self, it's part of my false self, it's part of my identity, it's part of my construct. And I really, more than I ever have a freedom to let almost all of that go. I don't find myself in with my children. I don't know, things are cleaner than they've ever been at my life. And I think a significant part of the basis of that openness has to do with what Bill talks about in step 7, that humility has become an operating presence. And it has softened me, and it has made me, I am less reactive. And one of the reasons I'm less reactive is I'm less important. And that's just fine with me. I don't want to be important anymore. I don't, you know, it is. And I think the foundation of 6 and 7, you know, for me was the fear that of becoming what God would have me be. Desmond Tutu used to talk about that people were not really afraid of, what they were most afraid of is how wonderful they could be. And that for most of us to stand in front of, you know, I think for most of us, if we use the full impact of our intelligence and stuff, almost everybody on the screen could be a doctor. You know, obviously life's not that way. We shouldn't, but I'm just saying a lot of us have intellectual abilities that we never examined or never expressed in the fullest extent of it. And I really think that, you know, a lot of us held back in a fear. I for sure did not know that I was afraid of success. I could identify that I was afraid of failure, but it was only with difficulty subsequent to that I found out that I was afraid. I was afraid if I really put it on the line that I really wouldn't be special. I'm afraid I could put it on the line that I might be average. And as long as I never put it on the line, people would assume, boy, if Bob ever put it on the line, he'd really do something, because he's pretty good, you know, loafing around with whatever the hell he's doing. And so the fear and apprehension in my life held me back. But the fear really had to do with, I really was not up to trying to be what my higher power would have me be. And today I realize that's stupid. You already are whatever the hell your higher power would have you be. There's no place else you could be. You know, you're not separate from God, nor could you ever be except in your mind. Your mind can separate you from God. But today, when they asked Chuck Chamberlain in that book, A New Pair of Glasses, how do you pray, Chuck? And Chuck's answer was constantly. And that's part of what's happening to me. It's almost my first go-to place is to immediately connect with my higher power. Now I have my moments where I don't do that well. But it is changing the character and the loudness of my life. I've always been an enormously impatient person. My wife can still kind of sense it in me, as women often have a much better sensor with respect to relationship and stuff like that. In my Buddhist readings, they talk about impatience being violence. And the first time I saw that, I thought, God, I mean, how can impatience be violent? Well, it is. It is if you're around people and they have to take care of you in lines and doctor's offices in a different situation when you're overreacting and you're making people around you uncomfortable, it's a feeling of violence. And today, again, that I have an ability to be able to, I have less of that going on. So I think that second surrender experience that many of us have between 5 and 15 years, just to kind of bracket it a little bit, we have to deepen our relationship with the steps. And we have to be willing, I think, to do inventory in some more detail and some more emphasis. And I think I have to, I'm going to go, one of the things that I'm going to do now with the next inventory that I take is I'm going to try to take, whatever 7 or 8 or 10 characteristics that I consider to be defects of character and start having a conversation around those defects of character. And rather than just the behavior, I want both. I mean, I want to talk about my actions and my behavior, but I also want to talk about the defects in themselves. And when I do that, and then be able to own up to the fact that, at 50 years of sobriety, I still have some issues that I need to attend to. I still have some things that I could clean up. And if I cleaned them up, I'd be kinder. I'm not going to get them all done. I don't have to get them all done. I think I'm doing, I think I'm okay. But I really wouldn't mind continuing to move, continuing to grow, and continuing to transform as God would have me do that. I've already been forgiven by everything I think I've ever done. My mind does not want me to know that. My mind wants me to know that I have to continually earn the forgiveness, and that I'll never really deserve it. But I think love wants to know that it's already done. You know, you've already been forgiven. You already are whatever God created you to be in that relationship. It's just fine. Why don't you enjoy it? And if you enjoy it, why don't you then share that love? You don't have to share your power. You don't have to share your money. You don't have to share, just share the love. And I think my life would be way less problematic. And it already is. I have for a rambunctious guy, I think a very good relationship with my wife. I think my wife would say he respects me and he's a good husband. I think that's you. I mean, I think, and my children, I think would say the same thing. And the joy that gives me, that my children could say, I think he's a good man. I'm glad he's my dad. I think we would say that of each other. And there's love in that. And I think that this 6 and 7 gives us the opportunity. And I think that this is where I think an awful lot of us kind of rest on our laurels. We get to a point where we know all the words of the steps. If someone asked any of us to give a little talk on step 11 or a little talk on 6, I think all of us could almost do it. But then if we asked ourselves how that operates in our lives, what's our demonstration? And I think if we really had the courage to be able to look at our demonstration in financial, sexual, familial, in all the areas of work, in all the areas of our lives, to be able to do another inventory of a mature member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to be able to take a look at how the rubber meets the road, the demonstration, and then understand that if our demonstration is not how we would have it, that our reliance and our surrender is the key that turns the lock, that opens the door to transformation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That was amazing.